Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. World quests have become such a normal part of WoW's gameplay experience that it's easy to forget that they didn't exist before Legion. Before then, your day-to-day gameplay loop usually consisted of dailies, which are of course very similar in nature, although a bit more restrictive. And although M+ is often lauded as Legion's main contribution to the game long term, I think that within the confines of Legion itself, world quests were more significant. Mythic Plus still needed some polishes, such as the Great Vault to make rewards more consistent, and the raiding system to incentivize you to not just run the same dungeon 50 billion times. World quests, on the other hand, were pretty much perfect when they came out, and a bit sadly have gone down in quality as the expansions have rolled by. I really don't want to overstate that point. I still think world quests are in a pretty good state overall. It's just that they were that good in the beginning and are less so today. And I suppose technically I'm not criticizing world quests themselves as much as how they're integrated with the rest of your gameplay experience. So let's get into it from the beginning where they were at their best. The main system that interacted with world quests at this point in time were emissaries. Every day, one of 7 different emissaries would pop and remain up for 3 days. And naturally, you couldn't have 2 copies of the same emissary up at once. 5 of these emissaries were tied to the specific Legion zones. You had Court of Ferondis for Azuna, the Dreamweavers for Val'sharah, High Mountain Tribe for High Mountain, the Valor Jar for Stormheim, and the Nightfallen for Suramar. Additionally, you had the Wardens who were tied to quests where you killed one named mob, and Kirin Tor emissaries, which did not give rep of their own but would give you a token of your choosing for another reputation, and whose world quests were basically fun little games. The majority of these emissaries would require you to complete 4 world quests with their associated faction, although I believe the Kirin Tor only required 3. And once you had finished any of these emissaries, you could go talk to their respective quartermasters to receive a cache with 1500 rep and various other rewards, including a higher than average chance at a legendary. Though of note, the Nightfallen caches would only reward 750 rep, but that faction kind of operated differently from the others and would receive a bunch of quests and patch content anyways. Now, this whole system was great for multiple reasons, first and foremost being that you didn't have to pick up any of these quests beforehand, which means a lot of the time you could make progress on them without even really intending to do so. Furthermore, unlike dailies, you had 3 days to complete them, not just the 1. And because you could have 3 up at a time, that means you could even double dip at times. For example, if you did a world quest to kill a named mob in Val'sharah, you would earn credit towards both the Wardens and Dreamweavers emissaries. For this reason, it is usually best to put off completing an emissary until the last day it was available. But if you weren't going to be around that day, you could just knock it out in advance. A 7th emissary would be added in patch 7.2, the Armies of Legionfall, which would have you complete quests on the Broken Shore, and an 8th and 9th were added in patch 7.3, the Army of the Light and the Argusian Reach, which had you complete world quests on Argus. All in all, I feel this was an amazing structure for a daily gameplay loop that was a nice balance between the strict daily system beforehand and the almost too loose system we have nowadays. But that's my very subjective opinion. I know lots of people love the freedom we have nowadays, so to each their own. World quests could also become very lucrative when you took into account the bodyguard system that Legion had. So among the followers you had to run missions in your class hall, there were several that you could choose to use as a bodyguard, who would either give you an ability to use or act as a companion that would follow you around and smack enemies in the face. These bodyguards could each be given 2 pieces of equipment, and a lot of this equipment would just give you free gold or resources whenever you completed a world quest. The gold, of course, was great, but the resources were even better, because you could use it to fuel your mission board and collect even more gold. A lot of people don't realize it because it wasn't technically as 0 effort as Garrison's, but the gold that you could earn from your Legion mission board was even more insane. And sometimes you would also get missions that awarded rep tokens, which was also very helpful. I don't remember the exact rate of upkeep, but I believe basically once a month I could take an alt out, complete 1 or 2 emissaries, and the whole process would give me enough resources to last until the next month. Eventually, Blizzard added even more rewards to the mix with Paragon caches. For every 10,000 rep you earned with one of these factions beyond Exalted, you would earn an extra box containing stuff like gold and resources, and if you were lucky, an extra cosmetic reward. These were for the most part mounts, but there was a pet and a toy thrown into the mix too, and these had about a 5% drop chance. Personally, Personally, I absolutely love the Paragon system, but I was definitely in the minority here. I know most people absolutely hated it. They, not inaccurately, viewed it as an RNG reward gated behind a rep grind. I can understand that frustration, but I ran the math back in the day. As long as you were being smart about it, the time investment required for these 1 in 20 Paragon mounts would be less than the time required for your typical 1% dungeon or raid drop mount. And honestly, these were just a lot more fun to farm, and that's coming from someone who loves farming old dungeons and raids for mounts. But clearly I am an outlier here, and Blizzard did listen to the community. Exclusive Paragon rewards became less common as time went on. I know in BFA they only added one mount this way, which was tied to the Ankoan or Unshackled factions, and I think there were actually 6 Paragon mounts in Shadowlands, but the drop rate had been significantly increased. I remember actually being a bit disappointed how quickly I got most of them. I believe nowadays Paragon caches don't give any exclusive rewards. It's pretty much just some nice free gold and other resources whenever you happen to hit that point. And finally, in regards to Legion, I want to talk about the PvP world quests. There were 2 types of these, the Warden Towers and the Free-for-All. Every day, one of 2 possible Warden Towers would be active in a given zone, these zones being Val'sharah, High Mountain, and Stormheim. And while these were technically PvP world quests, they usually played out like PvE ones. Unless someone from the opposite faction was deliberately trying to cause a ruckus, you just wouldn't run into enemy players. If you're a Horde player, you're very familiar with the fact that Greymane's forces hold this Warden Tower, break their ranks, show no mercy. And every 6 hours, one of 4 different free-for-all world quests would be active. These ones were definitely more geared to killing actual players, although they did have ways to complete them through PvE objectives if nobody else was around. Again, these world quests interacted very well with another system we had at the time, which was Prestige. Granted, Prestige does still exist today. They just really stretched it out and drastically reduced the progress that world quests would give towards it. And in fact, you only get an actual tangible reward for it like every 50 levels or so. So it's really not something worth actively grinding out, it's just something you'll very slowly make progress on as you PvP. So all in all, world quests were in a fantastic state in Legion, and then things slowly started to go downhill. Battle for Azeroth did still retain the emissary system, but they condensed all 3 zones of the enemy continent into one emissary. This unfortunately meant that as a Horde player, I didn't really get to experience Kultiris as much as you would think. Still, things largely resembled how they operated in Legion. Aside from your 3 home zone factions and your 1 enemy continent faction, there were also the Tortollan Seekers, who took over the minigame role from the Kirin Tor, and the Champions of Azeroth. Patch 8.2 would add the Ankoan or the Unshackled to the possibilities as well. And in 8.1 we got Faction Assaults, which were just a nice fun way to shake up the experience, especially if you actually did them with War Mode on. However, come Shadowlands, the emissary system was dropped. In its stead, we got callings, which spiritually were very similar. They were still asking you to do activities in a specific zone to earn rep, but if I remember correctly, these activities were more specific, which meant you were less likely to just passively complete them. And most importantly, you had to actively pick up these callings instead of them just being there, which may seem really trivial, and it kind of is, but it also really sucks when you would wind up completing some of the objectives and then remember to pick up your calling. And as of Dragonflight, the emissary concept seems to have been dropped entirely. You could sort of argue that they brought it back with the War Within. Every 3.5 days, you get these sort of prime world quests that require you to complete 3 other world quests in the same zone to unlock them, but they're pretty much there just as an extra source of pinnacle caches. And even the reputation rewards just don't feel that great anymore. Renown type reputations as a whole have just been very easy to make progress on, especially now that they're warband wide, and there's no real incentive to go beyond the max renown level. Now, circling back a little bit, I want to touch on the PvP world quests. I don't believe there were any in BFA, I could be wrong about that. I think they came back in Shadowlands and have been around since. There just haven't really been any rewards from them that I cared about until the War Within, but these are inherently less fun than they were in Legion. And that's due not just to the rewards being less generous, but also the implementation of War Mode and the fact that you don't see these PvP world quests unless you're in War Mode, which means you wind up seeing a lot less of just your average player who might want the rewards from that specific world quest. It's just people who made the active decision to turn War Mode on. And there's usually a pretty big faction imbalance, which shouldn't matter in free-for-all areas, but people definitely still group up for free-for-all world quests, and if you're one of the people that do that, let me just say, you're a coward! I'm kidding, of course. but not entirely. So yeah, PvP world quests have also become a bit of a disappointment. So that's pretty much everything I had to cover. I think the overarching problem is that back in Legion, you had all these other systems to prop up world quests and make them feel great, and nowadays world quests just sort of exist as a tool to prop up other systems, and that doesn't work as well. For example, pretty much the only world quest reward I've cared about the whole expansion have been key coffer fragments, and that's just not appealing, at least to me. The solution, in my eyes at least, is just go back to how things were in Legion, or at least bring back emissaries and Paragon rewards. But I'm sure there are other solutions that Blizzard could implement, maybe even solutions that other players don't hate. But at any rate, I hope something is done, because world quests are great, and I hope they don't just fade into mundanity. Right, so for the drawing this week, I decided to go with Khadgar, because world quests were implemented in Legion, where Khadgar was a prominent figure, and he was giving you a bunch of those world quests. And honestly, who doesn't love Khadgar? He's just such a friendly, fun-loving, comforting character. He was basically our guide through Warlords of Draenor, and one of our main guides in Legion. He sort of got his last hurrah in Dragonflight, and I feel like they've basically decided to retire his character in the War Within, given that he's in a wheelchair now. I mean, he could always recover. It just feels like they want Khadgar to finally be able to take things easy. And like I said in my War Within First Impressions video, I am glad that he survived the destruction of Dalaran, just because his last move being a big energy blast seemed a bit basic for him. Although I do think it's neat and almost certainly unintended that he used the attack that he debuted in his Harbingers video against Xal'atath, who is the Harbinger. But yeah, it fits his clever characterization far better for his last big move to be transmuting himself into arcane energy to survive being consumed by the Dark Heart. Anyway, I gave him a bit of an arcane barrage effect in his right hand, and I wanted to do some sort of magic circle in his left hand, but it just wound up looking stupid and like an actual shield or something until I added the arcane missiles. But the arcane missiles were pointed at the ground, which made no sense, so I just decided to scrap the whole thing because I didn't want to redraw his arm. I think it still works. And I put him in Dalaran, specifically in front of the Violet Citadel, just because by now he's the character that I most associate with Dalaran. I mean, he has been the leader of the Kirin Tor ever since Jaina left in Legion. So thank you for all your years of service, Khadgar, and I hope you get some nice R&R. But that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next week. Bye-bye!